Alright, some of my students said they had a lot of trouble with number 2 on their team talk sheet, so I chose to kind of demonstrate for the students how to do this one because it does involve a percentage and a lot of the items involve percentages, so if they have trouble with number 2, they're probably not going to have an easy go of it working on some of the other items. So let's look at number 2, and I think I'm going to try to make sense of the problem, which goes with thinking like a mathematician number 1. And I'm going to put a plan for how to solve it. It says here that a professional soccer team held a tryout and D players tried out. We don't know how many tried out, so they gave the variable D. D represents the people who tried out. 35% of those players made the team. Wow, so out of all the people who showed up, 35% of them made the team. A, write an algebraic expression to describe the number of players who made the team. Okay. The way I would solve this one, I'm going to do the algebraic expression first, and B wants me to evaluate that expression if D equals 80. It turns out 80 people showed up. So what I'm going to do here for number 2 is I'm going to convert that percent to a decimal. It's something you have to do. You just have to do it. Now, when you have 35% and you want to convert it to a decimal, you are essentially dividing 35 by 100. And when you divide 35 by 100, you're going to get 35 hundredths. And I'm going to multiply that 35 hundredths by the number of people who showed up. And that number is represented by D. So I went ahead and I took 35%, converted it to a decimal, and then I'm multiplying it by D. And I'm showing that in my algebraic expression as a coefficient and variable. Whenever you have a coefficient and variable, you have an operation of multiplication going on. Now, it wants us to evaluate the expression for D equals 80. So what I would do here is I'm going to say 35 hundredths times 80. And that's how I would write it out. That's how I'd write it out. Now you can write it all kinds of ways. You could write it out 35 hundredths with the multiplication dot 80. You can say 35 hundredths with the X multiplication symbol 80. There's all kinds of ways, but when I was going to school, this was the way we did it. So I always just write it 35 hundredths and then in parentheses I'll put 80. Now I'm going to go ahead and solve. I'm going to evaluate / solve this. So I'm going to put 80 here, 35 here, that's 35 hundredths. And one thing I want to remind my students is you don't have to worry about lining up your decimal points when you're multiplying decimals. The only time you have to worry about lining up those decimal points is when you are adding or subtracting decimals. Then of course your decimal points have to be lined up, but in this case I don't have to. I'll deal with where to put the decimal after I find my product. So I'm going to say 5 times 0 is 0, 5 times 8 is 40. My placeholder, 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 8 is 24, 0, 0, 4 plus 4 is 8, nothing plus 2 is 2. Now I have 1, 2 digits to the right of my decimal point here. So I have to have 2 digits to the right of my decimal point here, so I'm going to put it right here. So it turns out that if 80 people showed up to play for this, to try out for this professional team, and 35% of the people who showed up made the team, then 28 people made the team. So, once again, when you have to show 35% of a value, you have to convert that percent to a decimal. You do that by taking the value, whether it's 35% or whether it's 2%. You divide it by 100. If you divide 35% by 100, you get 0.35. If you divide 2 by 100, you would get 0.02. And then you multiply it by whatever the value of your variable is, in this case 80, and it will give you the number of players who made the team. I hope that this video is a good demonstration for my students, as it will be a good model for some of the other problems where you have to deal with percents and converting them to decimals and that sort of thing when you solve your problem. Now, just to recap, my math practice was, number one, I kind of made sense of what I had to do and I came up with a plan, and I incorporated, I guess, my order of operations and worked it out step by step. All right, what grade do I deserve for that, children?
100. 100.
All right, how many of you feel like you could probably solve this type of problem now if you saw how I solved it? Okay, that's encouraging. Good job, good job.